instability that now seems to be baked in to this GNU, and the extent to which President Ramaphosa had to bend over backwards to make concessions, what we will soon learn when it comes to appointing the ministers and other key figures. Now, the left wing within the ANC and his alliance, the SACP, COSATU, they're already, last week, very openly unhappy if that ANC-DA plus now IFP, good PA, hangs together, I think, because they fear that a revanchism, a sort of return to older ways of organizing society for the benefits of the DA's main constituents, who are generally not low-income black residents. Now, those perceptions may change if the DA performs very well, but if you do go back to President Mandela, he had a sort of assimilation approach, and he very effectively, and whoever managed the vote totals at the end, with ANC just over 60, the National Party of FW de Klerk just over 20, and Inkatha just over 10. So there was that quite easy logic of that government of national unity. But it didn't work out, did it? Just after 2 years and 1 month, de Klerk pulled out, and then the National Party, the new National Party, went into oblivion. In fact, was drawn into the ANC ultimately through Martinez van Schalkwyk, and then the DA came up as the opposition. Those governments of national unity that we've seen in municipalities have a similar chaos. And so I would suspect that if we're looking at the arrangements that were just made on Friday, that there will be sufficient consensus to have a party-based joint project and not rely upon those individual leaders. I think you're probably making reference to President Zuma or President Mbeki, who was, quite authoritarian in some ways and dictatorial in the way he constructed his government. And this is a much more unstable situation where if it's 60%, that minimal consensus just only allows for the ANC and DA, well, then we're forgetting a new formation that has 28%, and that would be the Progressive Caucus, which the MK party has just joined with their 15 plus the 13 led by the EFF and some of the other small parties. To me, that's a sort of, let's say, waiting in the wings, and it has all sorts of features that I'm sure your listeners will be saying, well, no, we don't want to see a return to the corruption. We don't want to see that ethnicism. We don't want to see some of the problems associated with some of those groups. But that probably is something we'll look forward to the next alliance in a government of national unity once this one falls apart, as I predict. Maybe I'm too pessimistic. Others might have a different idea of how this is going to unfold, but I think the contradictions between the ANC and the DA and the internal strife within the ANC are going to be formidable.
Michael, do you think that it's ironic that we end up here 30 years after Madiba, and just as Patrick was outlining there, the decisions that Madiba's government had to make at the time versus the decisions that have to be made today, how different those two situations are, and yet in a very similar scenario?
I don't see it as ironic. I think there's interesting parallels or echoes. The current political regime, comparing it with the GNU at the beginning of the democratic era. I think perhaps what's happened in the past few weeks is a reflection or the consequence of our proportional representation system, party-based list system of proportional representation. And one of the characteristics of such a system is precisely the kind of instability to which Patrick has just made reference. If you look at most notoriously the consequences of proportional representation in a country like Italy, which famously had 6 governments in a 12-month period, where coalitions are put together, coalitions of multiple parties, none of which have above 50%, they might stand up for 6 weeks, but at the first test, they fall apart because it turns out that these are marriages of incompatibles. And I think it may well be that we are moving, or we are seeing the inevitable consequences of a proportional representation system. And we are now going to have to navigate those consequences. Again, to go back to the courts, it's all the more so when we've moved away from a situation of one-party dominance and into an era of instability. It's all the more important that the courts be there as a backstop to provide a thread of both of legitimacy and continuity.
Okay. We'll continue our conversation in a moment, and then, of course, we will hear more reflections from our guests and also take you back to some of those inaugurations we've had in the past. It's now 10:30. Time for your latest news headlines.
Thank you very much, Cathy, and a very good morning. With the news headlines, Kemudupi Makhalemele. Analysts have sought to explain why investors have welcomed the formation of a government of national unity. Foreign dignitaries that will attend the inauguration of the president-elect Cyril Ramaphosa have started to arrive in the country. And Limpopo police have arrested 2 suspected illegal miners in Dipalale in Sekhukhune. I'll be back with a full news update at 11.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand is currently trading at 18 rand 19 to the dollar, 23 rand 07 to the pound, and 19 rand 51 to the euro. Markets in Asia were higher at the closing bell. The JSE is high in mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe are green across the board. Gold is trading at $2,313. Platinum $967 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $84.16 a barrel.
Think bigger than just a banking partner. Think a team of specialized experts supporting you to make better financial decisions to enable your growth aspirations. Think a strategic partnership providing indispensable advice to help you make the right moves. Think bigger. Think Nedbank Commercial Banking. For more information, visit nedbank.co.za. See money differently. Nedbank. We're a licensed FSP and registered credit provider.
Set in a gleaming new high-tech trauma center that deals with only the most serious cases, an emergency medical team must battle through the crucial first hour of care to save lives that hang in the balance. Each distinctive case is told with a thrilling intensity and nail-biting urgency as the team work on the very edge of the medically possible. This is a medical drama like no other. This is Critical. Mondays to Wednesdays at 9 p.m. on S3. Starts 11 June. Channel your best drama with BBC Primetime only on S3. Open up.
Are you shopping around for the best car insurance deal on the market? 46-year-old Zanele got a great deal on her car insurance when she called Outsurance. She now pays only $1,313 to insure her white 2023 Audi Q2 1.4T FSI S-Line S-Tronic. Get an Outsurance quote and see if you could save. SMS out to 30754 now. That's out to 30754. Outsurance is a licensed insurer and FSP. T's and C's online.
The National Pulse on SAFM.
Teenage pregnancy is a pandemic. Is that accurate?
Let us be very realistic with the facts. This teenage pregnancy is not homogeneously all over South Africa. It is actually focusing on an African child. Now, you need to really look back and say, what are the challenges there? What are the things that you don't find in the white community or vice versa that are actually making these children are vulnerable to teenage pregnancy?
Dr. Simongiseni Dlomo, the Deputy Minister of Health.
The National Pulse, weekdays 3 to 6 p.m.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana, weekdays 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue to reflect on 30 years of constitutionalism in South Africa. What does that mean, and how has that contributed to what has been a largely peaceful transition that we have seen over the last couple of days? My guest for this conversation, Professor Patrick Bond. He's a political economist and distinguished professor of sociology at the University of Johannesburg. Dan Mafora is a senior researcher at the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, and advocate Michael Osborne is a constitutional law expert. One of the other things that we're doing, of course, is taking you back to some of the moments, right, that have shaped this country, which is the inaugurations of various presidents. We kicked it off with Madiba in 1994. Well, do you remember this moment in 1999?
I solemnly and sincerely promise that we'll always promote all that will advance the Republic and oppose all that may harm it. Protect and promote the rights of all South Africans. Discharge my duties with all my strength and talents to the best of my knowledge and ability.
Will you please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God"?
So help me God.
Dan, how important would you say it is for leaders of this country, especially in the form of presidents, to believe in the Constitution, to believe in the rule of law? And if you can add to that, maybe some reflections on a Thabo Mbeki presidency.
I think it's absolutely crucial. I mean, part of having an oath of office and swearing to uphold the Constitution is precisely because leaders, the president of the country, is, it's supposed to be the model citizen for all of us to emulate. And I think that we had it quite good. Having a president like Nelson Mandela to begin with, who went out of his way to show respect for the Constitution, to reassure the public of his commitment to the Constitution and to carrying out judgments that were against him. I think some of the earliest judgments coming out of the Constitutional Court directly, struck down a few of his executive decisions as president at the time, and he made it a point to not only say that he will abide, but publicly doing so that the rest of South African society could see that this was a president that was committed to the Constitution and to the rule of law. And I think in large part, President Thabo Mbeki did the same. But of course, we know that during his presidency, we started to see some friction between the courts or the judiciary and the executive government, specifically in relation to the question of socio-economic rights. So as the Constitutional Court was issuing some of the more groundbreaking judgments, you'll remember the judgment of Grootboom, which related to the right to housing, and the Treatment Action Campaign judgment, which related to the right to health and the provision of antiretroviral treatment. That is when we start seeing kind of this pushback or this friction between the two arms of state. But of course, it's a healthy kind of friction because it speaks to the role of the court and the role of the executive as it relates to socioeconomic rights, which of course can implicate both law and policy, and the question of how you navigate that relationship. But I think all in all, we can say that was also quite a healthy kind of period of constitutional rule, and we know, of course, that when the time came, President Thabo Mbeki relinquished power as he should. And so I think that there was a strong foundation in terms of respect for the Constitution and the rule of law by the executive.
Michael, what do these oaths mean? For citizens and just residents of this country who will be looking on tomorrow as President Ramaphosa makes or takes that oath, what is that supposed to mean to us?
Now, Cathy, it may be, it's Patrick here, that Michael didn't rejoin the conversation as we changed the Zoom link. Would I be able to very quickly, before Michael can be brought back, and answer you?
Yes, please go ahead.
Have a friendly disagreement with Dan. I'd love to have a little fight over whether indeed the socio-economic rights clauses have been helpful and whether they were respected. I don't think President Nelson Mandela respected the rights of all South Africans because he allowed Deputy President Mbeki and then Finance Minister Trevor Manuel to impose GEAR, Growth Employment Redistribution. It was the homegrown structural adjustment designed by the World Bank in 1996, and it cut the budget dramatically. And, it led to what our first experience, if you remember, Dan, the Subramani case at the Addington Hospital, where Mr. Subramani needed dialysis. He was suffering his kidney, and he could have lived, but because of a provision in the socio-economic rights clauses, which is, quote, within available resources. The other very objectionable provision is progressive realization, meaning the state can do maybe one kidney dialysis more than last year, and that's fine, or one house or one water tap. Progressive realization. And the specific problem when you're cutting the budget, aside from the arms deal that was coming up at the time, but when you're cutting the budget unnecessarily because you're also cutting corporate taxes, which is what Mandela and Mbeki did. It was 52.5% in 1992, and by the end of Mandela's government, it was down to 39, and now it's down to 27. That's an artificial, let's say, imposition of within available resources. And I think in Subramani, 1997, dialysis at the Addington Hospital on the South Durban beachfront, where Grootboom, I don't think it was a success. She died homeless. Eileen Grootboom died in 2008 without a home. And what happened there was that the court simply said, Joe Slovo, the first housing minister until he passed in early 1995, he put a white paper, a policy, in late 94, the first one, aside from the RDP white paper, which just as a footnote, I happen to be the drafter of. And when I saw those, let's say, power relations unfold in 94, and even Joe Slovo, head of the Communist Party, adopted a World Bank-designed housing policy, I knew, well, we were sunk. And because of that policy, Grootboom decision in 2000 declared Slovo's unconstitutional failure to support poorest South Africans in their housing needs, like Eileen Grootboom. But the problem was, Dan, they said, in the division of labor in the government, we can't make policy. And then finally, the third, yes, sure, we all celebrate treatment action campaign for pregnant women who are living with HIV getting nevirapine, not to pass it on. That was something in 2002 that was a great advance, but it was a relatively economic decision because it would cost more for the hospitals to take care of HIV-positive children after their mother had died. The point being, the final of these major socioeconomic rights cases, which was 2009, it was Mazibuko versus Joburg Water. The then court, which Kate O'Regan wrote the judgment for, rejected a Supreme Court and High Court decision that ordinary people in Soweto should have more water and they shouldn't have prepayment self-disconnections. The whole point of this is that we have these clauses in the Constitution that protect property rights, juristic personhood, that is the sort of rights of a corporate. It provides these weasel words like within available resources and the progressive realization. And the result is our socioeconomic rights clauses have been virtually useless for all of the social advocates that hate, as I do, I'm sure you do, living in the most unequal country in the world, or here in Johannesburg, the most unequal city in the world. We just can't use the Constitution, apparently. We keep losing these cases because of those weasel words.
I suppose that what you're pointing us to, Professor Bond, is the fact that when we talk about constitutionalism, it's more than just the rule of law. Yes, we must celebrate the rule of law. We must celebrate the fact that our courts are largely independent. But of course, there is also a commitment in the Constitution around dignity and equality. And the extent to which then that is fully realized is, of course, it's got a big question mark next to it, right?
Yes, the record has been appalling when you take apartheid inequality, poverty and unemployment, and make it far worse through macroeconomic policies. Now, that's where I fear where the Democratic Alliance will have a negative impact by promoting those very policies, especially austerity. Those were policies that were partly homegrown, but the International Monetary Fund in July 2020 made a loan, and the hidden conditions there are that we continue to seek a primary budget surplus. That was achieved this year. That is, aside from interest payments, we're raising more money than we're spending, and yet the vast unmet needs. And with climate catastrophe looming, and we've seen even in the last couple of weeks, the devastation of big storms, of extreme weather. Durban had 500 deaths in 2022 and devastating damage. And we just don't have the money to do proper adaptation, resilience, and have a just transition. And that's because of, neoliberal, let's call them, pro-business policies. And unfortunately, the center right now is strengthened. And what I would love to see, which is an imagination, of course, because I'm not sure we can really trust that progressive caucus given this record of corruption, but it would be the sorts of policies that you sometimes hear from the populist left, which is redistribute more to the masses of people. Again, I don't think it's necessarily going to be a progressive second GNU after this one fails, if it is the ANC going to the progressive caucus, but we definitely need something from below to push the resources back to ordinary people, don't we?
Michael?
Cathy, yes, I'm sorry, I was absent, I'm back. Can I say I disagree fundamentally with what Patrick has just said, for the following reasons. Like it or not, we have a liberal democratic constitution. We don't have a charter of socialism. We've got fundamentally the same structure of constitution as one sees in Western democracies like the US, Canada, Germany, etc. And what these constitutions do is they establish the rule of law at the bedrock. They also establish a structure of government. They divide powers amongst the organs of state, or the arms of government. And one of the things that these constitutions do is they accord to the legislature the power to appropriate and spend money. And it's the job of the legislature to decide what tax rates to apply. And secondly, to appropriate money for the different portfolios. Now, there is, of course, unlike in most of the other democracies I've just mentioned, a set of fairly strong socioeconomic rights also in the Constitution, which go beyond what might be called the liberal rights established in the other democracies, and actually give, or purport to assign, I should say, enforceable rights are vested in poor people who want water, electricity, shelter, etc. But then what Patrick correctly focuses upon is that those socioeconomic rights are qualified in the text of the Constitution by the concept of progressive realization and being subject to available resources. So these rights, unlike the liberal rights, are subject to an internal qualification, which means that an opportunity is given to the courts to decide that to decide that the primary duty of appropriation and allocation of resources falls within the legislature. It's not for the court, as it were, to take over the function of the legislature, except in the most extreme cases. The idea is that the courts will defer then to the legislative judgment as to the appropriate distribution of resources. Now, it doesn't have to be like that. We could have an amendment to the Constitution to strike out the progressive realization clause, and then we might have a document truly for a social democratic state or even a socialist state. But that's not what we have at the moment.
Okay. Patrick, do you want to respond briefly before I give Dan a chance to come in?
Yes, fair enough. And I think that is the scenario that maybe people listening to you will fear this, but after the ANC-DA-IFP fails, it might be 2 years, and we don't know how long, but let's predict as one scenario, well, then the ANC will need a progressive caucus with 28%, which is more than the 2/3. So be prepared for some very interesting debates about fixing some of these core flaws in the Constitution. And I don't know if Michael would agree because he's been so involved in a corporate restitution, but one of those, giving juristic personhood, that is, corporates are human beings like you and me with the same rights, and giving those property rights with such centrality could be something we could overcome. And I think we may need to in order to address some of the most detrimental features of our political economy, corporate power. And these aren't just any corporates, Cathy and Dan and Michael. These corporates that we have in Sandton and Rosebank, Stellenbosch and Central Cape Town and Umhlanga are regularly rated by PwC, not by some Marxist, academic like myself, but by PwC as the most corrupt in the world. If you go to their biannual economic crime and fraud survey, they were number 1 in the world, whereas our government was always around number 70 least corrupt or 110th most corrupt in the Transparency International. We have a really wicked problem, don't we, of inherited white power in corporate South Africa. And now the DA comes into power, and of course, the celebrations you could see in the stock market with state capture being, I think, well rewarded by huge increases in the valuations of our big banks and retailers and all the rest. So to me, that's the big challenge, to move quickly through ANC-DA and get to somewhere better.
Okay. Thanks for that reflection. Dan, I know you've been dying to come in.
Yeah, I think Professor Bond will be very surprised to hear that I agree with him. Largely on the weakness, the textual weaknesses inherent in those socioeconomic rights clauses. But my point was not that the socioeconomic rights clauses, are some sort of magic bullet that has transformed or has been able to transform the life of lots of South Africans. But my point was that those weasel words that were included, what Professor Bond calls weasel words, that were included in those clauses, were precisely because of the internal resistance from the ANC to the idea that there could be socioeconomic rights that could be enforced in courts, right? So you hear story that former Justice Albie Sachs has always told was that he himself did not believe that socioeconomic rights should be enforceable by courts, and yet these cases, Grootboom, Supermani, and the TAC cases, were all very low hanging fruit, right? In terms of socioeconomic rights, they were about the very basic things that are needed to sustain a dignified life in South Africa, and they still faced resistance from the ANC and from the executive. And so the question isn't whether or not, we've been able to reach some form of social democracy where there are large or like extensive programs of redistribution and the like, but that there is an avenue for ordinary South Africans to force the government in some small way to provide them with very basic things. And I think that Professor Bond talks a lot about the kind of neoliberalism that is represented by this DA ANC kind of grand coalition, and perhaps he's right, but I think that's a different conversation to the one that we're talking about how have we fared with the constitution that we have, right? And perhaps the constitution that we have is not perfect, and there needs to be that conversation. But I think up to this point, we are able to see the potential that this constitution has to effect meaningful change in people's lives.
Cathy, could I jump in?
Yeah, please briefly for me, Advocate.
Because, yes, Dan has just offered us a timely reminder. The enforceability of socioeconomic rights by the courts is not it's somewhat peculiar, because there were strong voices on the left saying that we don't want socioeconomic rights to be enforced by the courts, precisely because we know that courts are going to tend to be conservative bodies which are responsive to the ruling classes. We want the duty to enforce socioeconomic rights to be squarely within the province of the legislature. So I think that puts a somewhat peculiar ideological spin on this whole debate.
Also, as all of you are speaking, right, I'm getting offshoots of conversations that perhaps we could also be having, right, around some of the complexities that are that come out of the constitution that we have, and why it is that we consistently see this tension between the legislature and, of course, the executive when it comes to what needs to be done, and just this lack of consensus. What is in the Constitution versus what is actually done, what is actually practiced. One just has to think about young Michael Komape in that case that took place around the pit latrines. I think it's one of those that really gives a great example of the socioeconomic rights and the enforceability of that, and having that come out through the courts. So we're quickly running out of time for this conversation. Tomorrow perhaps will be very different in the way of the inauguration of Cyril Ramaphosa. I don't know if the union buildings will, the grounds will be filled of thousands of South Africans who will come out to witness him being sworn in as president. The mood in the country is very, very different to what it has been before. Professor Bond, very briefly from you then, what do you think we can create out of this moment that we're in, and the disconnect that South Africans are feeling from the leadership, and the need then to also bring back that interconnectedness, that people are able to see themselves in the leaders that they have?
Yes, and if I can end with just thanking Dan and Michael for doing an end run around me on the left. That doesn't happen enough, and I appreciate that when they were reminding that the bourgeoisie likes the courts the way they are, and we shouldn't rely on them for socioeconomic rights. So let's then say for tomorrow and for the period ahead, we'll have a societal experiment in ideological fluidity, because the ideological debate within the ANC was fierce over the last week, but it's been internal. And now, if the ANC now must share power, must share cabinet seats, must share some parliamentary opportunities, which will open up much more vibrancy in our legislature, then we have to thank the voters who did say, let's have a more balanced power structure. And I think I personally, and I'm sure many, would love to see where the ideological cards fall. And that's what I think that period right ahead will help us to do, which is to ask, do we want to move center right or to the right, the way Europe just did, left the way Britain will do in a couple of weeks, left the way Mexico just did, or far right the way the US probably will with Trump, this is the time for us to work out our ideologies, given the different policies and practices that have been not very effective at delivering for ordinary people.
All right. Michael, from you, very briefly, please.
Let me end with a note of agreement with what Patrick has just said. These are indeed going to be interesting times. And just to recur to something I mentioned earlier, it's lucky that we have a competent, corrupt-free high court system, and we're going to need that going forward in terms of maintaining political stability. Where I don't expect much progress to come from the courts, or at least not progress in the sense that Patrick hopes for, where I don't see very much changing is in terms of socio-economic rights. The court is pretty much, in the past decades, set up its self-conception of what the role of the court is, and I don't think there's any reason to think that's going to change.
Dan?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't be too triumphalist. I think this is just the beginning. I think the next few weeks, years, months are going to be difficult. But I think that we have the mechanisms and the infrastructure in place to navigate them peacefully, regardless of where we end up, whether further left or right, as Professor Bond has just said.
I thank you all for being part of this conversation. One of the things we'll have to do once we are through sort of this period is perhaps go back then to this idea of ideology, right? And what does it mean to be left? What does it mean to be right or centrist left, and all other permutations that we might see unfolding in this seventh administration? Professor Patrick Bond, Dan Mafora, Advocate Michael Osborne, let me thank you all for your time and contribution to this conversation. We're going to take the latest 11 o'clock news.
Thank you very much, Cathy. The top story is this hour: reaction to investor sentiment on the GNU and suspected Zamazamas bust in Limpopo. A very good morning to you. Analysts have sought to explain why investors have welcomed the formation of a government of national unity. They say they are convinced that it provides a framework for expedited infrastructure and other changes aimed at reviving the economy following years of weak growth and high unemployment. The rand was marginally firmer against the dollar in early trade following the confirmation of members of the unity last week. It is currently trading at 18.18 to the dollar. The ANC says it is committed to a smooth transition to the newly formed government of national unity to honor South Africans' aspirations. The party has extended an olive branch to opposition parties, urging them to join the GNU. The development comes as 5 parties, including the ANC, DA, IFP, Patriotic Alliance and the Good Party, enter into an agreement on governing the country ahead of the inauguration of the president-elect tomorrow. ANC spokesperson Mahlengi Mutsiri.
All parties have been approached by the ANC to come to the table. 5 parties have signed. It cannot be a grand coalition unless we think that the vote share of other parties is insignificant. The IFP and all the other parties that have signed. And the characterization that this is an ANC-DA arrangement is really devoid of facts.
Members of the Tripartite Alliance, meanwhile, remain opposed to the inclusion of the DA in the GNU. They have raised concerns about its viability and potential impact on the country's future. The Young Communist League's Mzwandile Takudi.
It is diluting the program for the National Democratic Revolution. As we say, we will not support the anti-worker neoliberalism, which has been from the political electorate, which is driven by austerity measures in our country. So we view this government of national unity as a representative of that dangerous transition.
Foreign dignitaries that will attend the inauguration of the President-elect Cyril Ramaphosa have started to arrive in the country. They include a large number of heads of government from the SADC region as well as Central and East Africa. Government says it is finalizing its preparations for the inauguration, which will take place at the Union Buildings in Pretoria. Ramaphosa was re-elected as the president of the country at the first sitting of the National Assembly on Friday. And just a reminder that the inauguration of the President-elect will be broadcast on SABC News Live on SABC Plus tomorrow. The proceedings will also be streamed live on the SABC News YouTube channel and on SABC Radio. And finally, in other news, police have arrested 2 suspected illegal miners in Dipale Sekhukhune in Limpopo. They've also recovered stockpiles of chrome that was to be taken to an unknown destination. Police spokesperson Malesela Ledwaba says the suspects will appear in court soon on charges of illegal mining and the violation of the Immigration Act.
The multidisciplinary forces operationalized information and went to the Pale illicit mining site, and stockpiles of chrome were indeed found on top of the mountain. The members made arrangements to bring it down and also moved it to a safer place. Several mining equipment were also recovered during the operation.
Recapping the top story this hour, analysts have sought to explain why investors have welcomed the formation of a government of national unity. For SAFM News, Kemudupi Mohlahlana.
Here, there, and everywhere. SAFM 106.1 FM in Bombela.
In an election period, isn't that how it should be? Meaning that they've set the agenda on the basis of their manifestos, and then media holds them accountable to their manifestos.
So I think that what you want to do, especially as the public broadcaster, is say, what are the issues that matter to people? What do people know, and what do they need to know? Because they're making choices about which political parties they may vote for, right? When I say that the political parties set the news agenda so they'd go have big events, understandably so. But is it really news? Rallies are rallies. Each leader is going to stand up and tell you how great they are and how rubbish all the other political parties are. It's not really much news, whereas we should have been going, well, gender-based violence, can we make sure that we ask them at least one gendered question? These are issues that are important to our audiences. And if you look at the kind of issues that people are interested in, so that we can actually start to make sure that we're meeting their needs in these ways.
Okay. William Bird, Director of Media Monitoring Africa.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
You're listening to The Talking Point. Welcome to the third and final hour of the show. Lots to think about based on the conversation we've had at 10 o'clock looking at constitutionalism and 30 years of this country's democracy and perhaps all of the unfinished business, right? And the things that we need to go back to, that we need to go back and reflect on, and perhaps that also need to be changed when it comes to our constitution. What does this all mean for the 7th administration, right? What does it mean? What can we expect, anticipate? You heard from all of our guests in the previous hour, they're expecting that it's not going to be easy sailing. There will be some bumps along the way. What exactly will those bumps entail? I'm joined by Ongama Mdimka, who's a political analyst and senior lecturer at the Nelson Mandela University. Ongama, good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning, Cathy. Good morning to your listeners.
If I can just draw on part of what came out of our conversation on constitutionalism, Professor Patrick Bond spoke about the fact that this seventh administration is going to require us to really contend with ideology and what it is that we believe and subscribe to. Are we left? Are we right? Are we center left? Are we center right? It can all get very complicated very quickly. But how big an issue is that going to be for the seventh administration?
So, even though in terms of the political campaigns, this is a big issue, my sense is that we don't account a lot in South Africa for outcomes of leadership. So you have ideological tensions, which we've had since some would argue, 1996. And in fact, as a developing country, we're always going to contend with ideological issues being located in a neoliberal international system. That's a given. Where I have lost a little bit of patience sometimes with the ideology debate is how structure or ideology is overemphasized over leadership potential or agency. How leaders can act within the given policy framework that we have to achieve greater results, and how when they fail, they are so quick to attribute things to either limiting ideological factors or, in fact, some very recently scapegoating the Constitution. Now, around this issue of leadership outcomes, Cathy, we've had a lot of people contribute to it. Among them, Mugai Toby, around this issue of how land inequality is partly perpetuated by inefficiency in that entire administrative apparatus, from land claims to processing land claims effectively. We could also make that same argument when it comes to, for example, what we have already agreed about, beneficiation, as per the Manufacturing Development Act of 1993. So that act particularly is not in contestation, but how far have we come in promoting beneficiation of our minerals in South Africa is not a question of incomplete ideological thought process, if you like, but a question of incapable leadership. People are failing to do the right thing in order to make use of what we already have to make sure that the results incrementally improve from one year to another. So this is where, for me, I'm saying, and in fact, by the way, this is where I was using the better coalition argument to say, those who are saying the leftist bloc, if you like, or the Black Parties bloc, represents a better ideological posture compared to the center-right bloc with the DA. I was quick to say, what we have not tried is not how further ideological battles we must do and ideological posture of the state we must do. What we have not tried is potential for effective leadership. And so I was among the few that were saying, let us give this new center-right coalition, if you like, a chance, not because of its ideological posture, but because of the evidence of commitment to leadership outcomes, which may be better. But what the center-right and center-left are going to do for each other is to help that leadership focus gives us also some gains as far as ideological things are concerned. You know what I mean?
Is this the calm before the storm, Ongama? In some ways, I must say, it feels that way. By and large, there seems to be an expectation that this government of national unity, this agreement, it won't hold for very long.
So that's politics, and that's coalition politics in South Africa so far. If I was acting within that government of national unity, mindful of the threat as far as survival is concerned, what would I do? And there are major short-term issues such as, for example, ensuring that as far as energy, water security are concerned, are things that are focused on. And then also, and unlocking investment in real terms now, not just, enabling speculation on our stock exchanges, but in the projects, for example, that have been committed to by in the various investment conferences. So how do you expedite those to break ground and start employing people? Then we know that throughout the spheres of government, whether it be at provincial, national, or local levels, there are funding ready or projects which have been developed by various private and public sector organizations, which only need to be enabled. So if I were in that administration, I would say, what are the top 10 high impact projects that actually need to be unlocked and they can give us results in a very short period of time? And that takes humility, the humility to say, those projects may be simply projects that have been, prepared by other politicians which may have been in different factions, but all we can do for the country, if we're thinking for the country, is to do whatever final thing is needed. In some instances, you may find that provinces are sitting on environmental impact assessments. And the question would be, how do you unlock those to expedite the records of decisions? In others, you would find that municipalities have got business plans for infrastructure projects that have not been funded. And there's incompetency to approach the relevant funding instruments, whether that be national treasury instruments or donor instruments. And you say, what's needed? So for me, the government should have an outcomes-based list of things to do which are real, which are based on synergy, rather than we are the first to come up with this. They got to approach this with humility and unlock South African potential where it matters. And the good thing about it now is that even the private sector projects, they have a government which they can also trust better than they could trust, say, an ANC government alone, or a leftist bloc, if you like. So what's stopping us from actually getting together and saying, here is what we should be unlocking? So if we're going to a national dialogue, that national dialogue shouldn't just be an abstract imagining process where there aren't tangible things that can be done in the next, say, 90 days, 100 days, or whatever the case may be, to really create good value for South Africans.
Ongama, is that not part of why then there is this prediction around a tussle, a looming tussle within this coalition framework, that even the low-hanging fruit, the 10, 11 big projects that that you have thought about, that even what those projects should be may not be easy to arrive at. And what we know is the fact that within the tripartite alliance itself, the SACP, COSATU, are still this morning coming out rejecting this government of national unity that includes working together with the Democratic Alliance. Surely that is not going to be inconsequential.
Absolutely. It's politics. In politics, there's power, there's contestation. You lead within a context of ambiguities very often. So but the issue is, the problems start when people do things and they are not in bad faith, not in good faith. So you find, for example, let's look at the port concessions, for example, which the DA included among some of the top things that it wants to be done. So if there are ports which are operated by the South African government, Transnet and TPT, and those are working well, there should not be this sometimes scandalization of that because people want to push a private sector agenda. I'm still very interested to understand ESCOM, for example. ESCOM is now performing, and it seems to me that part of what's changed is to put a leadership that is treating that utility and its mandate in good faith, and not attempting to collapse it so that you could increase the business case for more rapid transitioning. Yes, South Africa still has a transition to undertake. So for me, if as long as there's not, in some instances, you may find that, look, this power station it's no longer justifiable for it to be operated as it needs to be closed, and that closing is a technical business decision, based on the engineering realities of that plant. And then in another plant, you find that this plant is still good to go for another 10 years, given our energy supply crisis. But you've got some vested interests that want to collapse it so that they can justify private. You see, once there are bad faith there's bad faith decision making, or ports. There's a port that works, and the reason why it may be not performing sometimes may be either external factors that do not relate to the operations of a specific entity, TPT in this instance, but there's a grouping from somewhere that wants to take over that port. Those decisions for me are what makes us to not even be fighting courageously. But if government is acting in good faith, it doesn't matter who's fighting against it. Cathy, it's not the first time that our government is facing a reality where some of its allies are not supporting. I was at Kucha when both the Kucha project as well as the Gautrain project was being called by the left as vanity projects. Did government and the stakeholders that were acting within those projects stop? Absolutely not. Are those projects adding value to society? Absolutely. But were those that were fighting against the projects ignored? Not, they were not. For example, at Kucha, there ended up being this thing of a zone labor agreement that says, okay, well, if you do SEZs in South Africa, you're not going to exploit. And so you deal with the issues that the stakeholders are concerned about, but you don't stop, you continue with what you need to do.
We're in conversation with political analyst and senior lecturer at the Nelson Mandela University, Ongama Mdimka. We're looking at the bumps ahead in this coalition government. This is what will unfold post tomorrow when Cyril Ramaphosa is inaugurated as the president. I'm going to be taking some of your calls and your WhatsApp voice notes, your contributions to this conversation. In fact, I want to bring in some of the questions that you've already started asking. You can call in on 086 000 2032. What do you foresee perhaps as being some of the challenges that this government is going to face? On the WhatsApp voice note line 0614 104 107. Here's a question around policy, and it's an important question because it has come up in different ways over the last couple of days. How are these parties going to maintain their individuality as opposing parties who are part of the political contestation and the issues that they feel so strongly about within this government of national unity?
Are you back with me, Cathy?
Just hold that thought, Ongama.
Okay.
I wanted to play this voice note of a question by one of our listeners.
Bullies. Good morning, Cathy. I have a question, man. What is going to happen about the country's stance on Gaza, Ukraine, and the International Court of Justice? All those three fundamental policy issues, the DA is totally differed. They are on opposite tracks. Now they're in government together. What is going to happen to BRICS? BRICS was supposed to be this new thing that moves us away from the left and all that. What is going to happen now with this government, with these three fundamental opposing stances with regard to international relations? That is my question with regards to this new coalition with the DA. This is Soviet in King Williamstown. Thank you.
Ongama, a very interesting point there and very valid question too.
Absolutely. First of all, Cathy, I'm still longing for that senior lectureship. So my colleagues listening to you have heard now. So thank you for that. But officially, I'm not yet promoted to senior lecture. So as far as the foreign policy posture is concerned, two things that Fikile Mbalula mentioned when he was asked about this was that each of the coalition partners will remain who they are. And I think that if the ANC has got foreign affairs as the ministry, DIRCO, I think that it will continue its trajectory. The one thing that is good, though, about both the stances of the ANC and the DA is that the stance of the ANC in Ukraine, which is not logical, but political, and an issue of alignment with Russia, and in anyway, even South Africa has been pulling back from that hardline pro-Russian stance in that conflict to actually recognize it for what it is. So I'd be hoping that the Democratic Alliance also in Gaza, even if they are allied to Israel, as the ANC is allied to Russia, but logic has to prevail. You cannot call a genocide not a genocide. The same way that a Russian aggression should not be attempted to be, called by any other thing than what it actually is. So it's going to be an interesting one there as far as relations are concerned. But I doubt that foreign policy is going to be what undoes this coalition. That first comment, I forgot now what it was, Cathy.
Sure. That's fair enough, Ongama. I think that you've tackled by and large what was expressed by our listener there. Contradictions in government. Are we not running a risk of increasing contradictions? We have seen, even under an ANC-led government, where often there are inconsistencies in what the policy should be. One can think about the energy transition as a clear example of that. We have the Department of Energy and Minerals under Gwede Mantashe is saying one thing, and you've got the president saying another thing, right? And it leads to that tension. But ultimately, what that creates is confusion on policy. Are you anticipating that is something that will happen more and more often? If it can happen under just one party, where people meet at NEC meetings, they meet at NWC meetings, they get to see each other quite often, but still there isn't that consensus, how much more for when these constituencies are reporting to different parties that also have their own interests?
There certainly will be issues. The question for me is what the leaders will do about that. And I think that is a function of a number of things. One, the leadership at the level of the executive by the president is going to need a president who's a lot more focused and takes decisions a lot quicker. And then also at the level of the mechanisms that are going to be agreed upon, I can see some deadlocks on how they have outlined decision making should be happening. But I hope that they will always be acting in good faith, because you see, what makes things a lot more complex is underhanded dealings which politicians are prone to do. So that makes decision making to be a function of power dynamics rather than what helps us to achieve our objectives in the best way possible. Whenever that happens, it's actually it disrupts a logic, because then power dynamics become the issue, who has power to cause a rebellion in the NEC and force somebody's recall. Otherwise, I think that there's some framework that has been outlined, which should help as a guide in terms of how those things are going to be resolved. It doesn't give us a picture of some perfect way in which things are going to be done, but it shows us that our politicians have got some commitment to try and make it work.
What is working in good faith, Ongama? What does that mean practically?
Yeah, let's go back to that issue of energy you were highlighting. So we knew that we needed short-term energy supply, right? So one minister was wanting to resolve the short-term energy supply in ways that were going to create problems for a much longer period. So that is the powership issue, right? Now, that's a bad faith issue. So we could get energy, but negotiate a contract that says you're not going to tie us up for much longer than you actually need to do. And then the other good faith issue is how sometimes a business and by the way, this is something the media plays a role in, Cathy, where we create narratives about performance or lack thereof of state-owned enterprises. And we don't verify the claims that unscrupulous business people who have interest in taking in privatization are making claims which cannot be verified. And then we drive those narratives, which are bad faith things. So you take a state-owned enterprise that is doing well on a specific project or activity, and it is framed in a wrong way, in ways that propagate the agenda of badly meaning politicians and their business counterparts, instead of actually cutting through the chase and saying, you are saying this entity is not performing, but here's well stats that shows actually there's nothing wrong with this entity. If you want a public-private partnership, maybe explore that other port or whatever rail network that actually is not performing. So that's how I separate between good faith and bad faith. Are the claims true? And is the rationale for changing what is being done, which may be working, private business interests, or in fact efficiency of the state?
Sure. We'll continue this conversation in a moment. It's 11:30. Time for the latest news headlines.
Thank you very much, Cathy, and a very good morning. With the news headlines, Cathy Mohlahlana. A teenager has been gunned down in Philippi on the Cape Flats. Police say the 19-year-old was found with a gunshot wound to the head. Analysts have sought to explain why investors have welcomed the formation of a government of national unity, and the ANC says it is committed to a smooth transition to the newly formed GNU to honor the aspirations of all South Africans. Details of these and other stories coming up at midday.
Let's have the conversation. WhatsApp voice notes on 0614 104 107.
Good morning, Cathy. Loandle from Klaber. I seem to be understanding Mr. Mtimka is saying that ideological underpinnings can be dispensed with, right, in favor of leadership outcomes. I'm lost. I don't understand that. Right. For instance, the national insurance, health insurance, is backed up by a particular ideological underpinning that we cannot just let things be. We cannot be laissez-faire. You know, if we want to transform our society, we cannot just let things be. That is an ideological underpinning. The opposite of that is a democratic alliance, which just needs a police state, which can run the ports, can run the roads, and can run the courts. That is an ideological contestation. How do we overcome that? You can't say we must overlook ideology.
Hi, good morning, Cathy. Have you noticed recently it's always been the work and the job of the ANC to urge and to implore other political parties to join the government of the so-called government of national unity. The DA is not doing the same. They're just sitting there and allowing the ANC to do the talking on their behalf. I'm not sure if I'm reading too much into that. This is Klaba from the Eastern Cape. Thank you.
Gaba, I don't think you're wrong. I think the DA is probably avoiding that because they're clear. There's some people that they absolutely don't want to join the government of national unity. Ongaba Mtimka is my guest this morning, political analyst and lecturer at the Nelson Mandela University. Ongama, please respond to the issues raised by our listeners in those voice notes.
He's quite right as far as how some of the initiatives are ideological. Again, so ideology finds itself in practical things. For example, in order to drive an agenda that privatization must be undertaken, sometimes state performance, a crisis has to be precipitated so that we can all accept that the state doesn't perform and therefore you need the private sector. What I'm saying is that we can see instances where the state is not being made to perform purely because the state itself is actually, there's a fundamental issue with how a business, the business of, say, for example, hospitals is run, okay, and it's not run efficiently, whatever the case may be. But sometimes you can see deliberate attempts to make something fail so that it doesn't work, and so that's where I'm saying we've got to guard the issues. And then I think the listeners are right. The Democratic Alliance has actually said it on record that there are some partners they would rather they didn't come to a coalition. In fact, in the first place, and by the way, there's mutual hatred between them and the EFF, that makes them not be accommodative of either of them joining joining the government of national unity. The ANC got to be in this position where it is framed as shifting to the DA precisely because the EFF said they wouldn't be in the coalition. In fact, it's the DA that started this to say they wouldn't be in a coalition if the EFF was there, and obviously the EFF retaliated also.
All right, Sfiso, you're in Mpumalanga. Good morning, Sfiso.
Good morning to listeners.
Yes, Sfiso, you're on air.
Yes, Cathy. GNU. The problem I have with GNU, Cathy, is that if you look at the province like KZN, since I'm in Mpumalanga, MK is the majority there. So if we are saying we are uniting, whoever is in charge of the GNU was supposed to say, or was supposed to consider the fact that MK is the majority in KZN, so they are the ones who are supposed to lead the province. But at the same time, if you take nationally, we are saying, okay, we support the GNU if the ANC is leading the process. But why don't we adopt the same procedure in KZN to say we are adopting this view just to unite the province? Because now there are so many issues because many people voted for the MK, but the MK is not in charge of the province. So that move is not uniting the province, but seeks to divide the province.
Yeah, look, Sfiso. I mean, this idea of if a party that had the most votes, if we could extend that to say that they were the majority party, then we probably wouldn't need to have a conversation around coalitions. So I don't think that it's correct, factually correct, to say that parties that have received the most number of votes are the majority party. Majority is 50 plus 1.
I agree with you, Katie, but in terms of the numbers, if you look at the province like KZN, the people have spoken to say, most of us appreciate the NK, but why don't we, as those who are superseding the process of the GNU, to say, MK must be the leading party in KZN, because the idea is to unite.
Yeah, Ongama, let me bring you in here because, some parties will say that in the same way that an ANC can claim that, 40% vote, that most South Africans have voted for them. Others will say, actually, no. The 60% of the vote that has gone to other parties says that most South Africans don't actually want you in government. So it could play both ways. Ongama?
Yeah, so there isn't such a principle in our laws that says a party that has the most votes must be given the right to constitute a government first before others do. We don't have that. There's been some suggestions being made in some of these, informal processes, and politicians actually also created that. But if people of KZN have got a problem with the MK failing to constitute a government, they have MK to blame, because while they should have been leading the process of crafting a coalition, they were busy attempting to, either legitimately challenge the election outcome, or in fact busy casting aspersions and confused strategically as to what they wanted to do. So they must take accountability for that.
Yeah.
It's not other people who must take accountability for their failure to constitute a government.
I remember IFP saying that they had set up a meeting with the MK party and they just never showed up for that meeting. Mlenze, you're out in KZN. Good morning.
Morning, Cathy. How are you?
I'm good, Mlenze. Go for it.
Yeah. Cathy, two things for me. One is this GNU of Ramaphosa. Allow me to say it's a GNU of Ramaphosa. The GNU is not a brainchild of the African National Congress. I've been a member of the African National Congress since I was born, because I was born in the structures. My mom, my dad, they've been there. So I know the character of the African National Congress, and I don't need to be schooled about it at this day and age. The character of the African National Congress is that it does not associate itself with the oppressor. It always takes the side of the oppressed. The character of the African National Congress is that it associates itself with the marginalized, the poorest of the poor, the downtrodden. It does not associate itself with the wealthy and rich, filthy rich people. This marriage of the GNU, called GNU, is the marriage of Cyril Ramaphosa and Rupert and all those mafias who are sitting there in Cape Town, who are controlling this country. It's not the African National Congress which is in this marriage. It's Cyril Ramaphosa.
Okay.
That is one.
Okay.
Yeah. This is one.
Very briefly for me, Mlenze, because we do have, we are quickly running out of time, and there's somebody else that I want to put on air quickly. But yes, go for it.
Okay. This is one. Two, the media must not critique the two fighting factions in the African National Congress. There is a faction there led by Cyril Ramaphosa and Rupert and everybody who's sitting there in Cape Town. That is the one that is putting this marriage in place. And there is another grouping of faction led by the tiger, Mr. Kwetemantashe and Paul Mashatile. That grouping of Kwetemantashe and Paul Mashatile is the one that is still standing on the founding principles of African National Congress, not this nonsense of Cyril Ramaphosa.
Okay, Mlenze, KZN, we're going to have to leave it there for this morning. Ongama?
Two things there, Cathy. Some of us who worked in the public sector in the early 2000s to the late 2000s saw how you advance the agenda of transforming the country economically through clean measures, where the organization that was driving, whether it was transformation in terms of procurement, preferential procurement, or prescribing empowerment points in allocating licenses, had character that was above board and continued to receive clean audits. What's happened in the period from 2009 is that people who claim to be fighting for black people have come with a cloud of, with a dark cloud hanging over themselves, many of them. And some of us are refusing to accept that these people who've got a whole lot of scandals that they are facing are in fact about the black agenda, and in fact refuse any association of blackness with the agendas of capture and corruption that have been there. I'm not saying corruption started in 2009, but we've seen in local government and provincial government very a kleptocratic agenda of repurposing the institutions of the state for nefarious agendas of politicians. So some of us just don't buy that thing. And what I think that we have not tried is what many people fear. Because indeed, the DA is clear. It's been clear until in the last 2 weeks about how they are anti some of the transformation policies. That bit we know. But what I'm saying is that we have had a situation where people who agree about transformation and the need to transform South Africa's political economy have acted in bad faith and have ransacked the public purse. And have created a program where their pals are the ones who are favored for things. What Francis Fukuyama calls repatrimonialization. And what we have not tried is a group of politicians that has been campaigning around clean governance, but with a lack of credibility as far as their commitment to transformation is concerned. So I'm saying there is nothing wrong with trying that at this time, notwithstanding the legitimate fears that are there, which are legitimate.
That's where we're going to have to leave it for this morning. Remember, tomorrow we will have a special broadcast out of the Union Buildings as we bring you live coverage of the inauguration that will be taking place from early in the morning. Up next is the book reading.
The Trilidor Ultimate Big Blue Sale is now on. Get amazing discounts on the best security South Africans trust. With over 50 franchises across the country, you can always find a security expert near you. So call 0861 Trilidor or visit trilidor.co.za today. Terms and conditions apply.
Set in a gleaming new high-tech trauma center that deals with only the most serious cases, an emergency medical team must battle through the crucial first hour of care to save lives that hang in the balance. Each distinctive case is told with a thrilling intensity and nail-biting urgency as the team work on the very edge of the medically possible. This is a medical drama like no other. This is Critical. Mondays to Wednesdays at 9 p.m. on S3. Starts 11 June. Channel your best drama with BBC Primetime only on S3. Open up.
SAFM Sunrise with Stephen Grootes.
What is it about the rest of us that you don't like? That people who want to go and live in Oranje feel they need to go and live with people only like themselves? I mean, what have the rest of us done?
No, it's nothing like that. It's a community within the South African community of communities. I mean, if you go to a place like Komaggas or Concordia or Steenkop, all Northern Cape communities, nobody asks that. Nobody asks, why do you stay here where you are only Namas or whatever? The idea of having a community continuing itself, we want to, in a certain sense, structure our relation with the rest of the country, and in this case with the provincial government. There's nothing funny about that.
Dr. Wynand Boshoff, thank you, leader of the Freedom Front Plus in the Northern Cape.
SAFM Sunrise with Stephen Grootes, 6 to 9 a.m.
The book reading. Please note that the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SAFM presents another episode of The Door, an addict's journey, read by Simpson Kumalo.
In Finding My Voice, I was introduced to an American woman living in South Africa and running an agency for speakers. She came to hear me at one of the meetings where I volunteered and asked if she could represent me. I agreed, of course. I just couldn't believe that there was a profession in that space. I was sent to my first speaking engagement and couldn't believe the amount that I was paid. It was incredible. I decided to pursue this speaking career with vigor, and I ended up being one of South Africa's most sought-after speakers. I was driven. In 1997, I was part of the team that organized the prayer service at the Trade Center for the New South Africa. There were many forces that were opposed to the possibility of a future that included most of its citizenry. I was due to fly to the US after the prayer meeting, and as I walked into the Trade Center, I saw something that caught my attention, so much so that I almost tripped and fell. I slowly followed and watched who she was with. It turns out she was there with a woman I knew. Needless to say, before the prayer meeting was over and I was on the plane to the USA, I could not stop thinking about her. I'd seen beauty before, but this one defied logic. When I got to America, I immediately started making phone calls to track this beauty down. I finally got hold of her friend and persuaded her to tell me all about this beautiful woman and give me her number. When I returned, I tracked her down and eventually we went on our first date. I knew then that Ntabiseng would be the mother of my children. I don't know about her, but for me, it was love at first sight. She was studying in Pretoria at a university called Medunsa, and I didn't care how long it took me to get there. Sometimes I would travel both Saturday and Sunday to be with her. The distance didn't matter. I just wanted to be with her. I introduced her to my folks, and everyone at home just fell in love with her. She had this demeanor, this aura about her that was welcoming. She was quiet and reserved and talked very little, and if you didn't know her, you might think she was conceited. But nothing could be further from the truth. She was humble, beautiful inside and out, smart, warm, and I was smitten. I dispatched a delegation quickly to negotiate lobola, a sacred, colorful tradition that brings together two families through marriage. I facilitated events of serious magnitude for government and eventually decided to start a business in the consulting space called Empower Consulting with a gentleman called Craig Wilkinson. We grew the business and roped in other professionals to help us realize our dream. We then further decided to empower ourselves by opening up an investment company, albeit very small, and decided to play in the manufacturing space. We grew by leaps and bounds in this space, and the money started to flow. In my community development initiatives, I became an integral part of the formation of a young organization called the I Can Foundation. What I saw when I came back were a lot of defeated people. There was a lot of excitement about the possibility of a new South Africa and what it was going to offer the majority of the people. But one of the things that apartheid did to the black nation was to strip us of our dignity and humanity. We became foreigners in our own land, and the system was designed to cripple us psychologically, and this was going to prove rather tedious and very difficult for the average man on the street to overcome. What did freedom mean for him, and how was he going to cope with the reality of what is going on in his life? The foundation was driven by the need to help the society in which we found ourselves. We went all over the country inspiring young people with the ability and capacity to dream. We became mentors for the up-and-coming generations of South Africans who were eager to re-engineer their lives. Money didn't matter. What did matter was to give back to the community that groomed and shaped and made us what we became. I became excited about South Africa and the prospects of a new democracy. I'd caught the entrepreneurial spirit from Mrs. Buckler and wanted to do something for myself. Having studied political science and likes of Karl Marx, Antonio Gramsci, Paul Freire, and many more, I knew the solution for me to start my own thing. Even Karl Marx talks about controlling the means of production, and I wanted to be independent. I was everywhere and traveled the country with the messages of democracy. I'd also made peace with my few sins that I had committed and recommitted myself to my faith in the living God. I met a mentor who was to be my spiritual guide, Pastor Nick Musupi. This man transformed my life. At the time, he was pastoring 2 churches in Katlehong and Kwatema. He was an intellectual, a political commentator, and his sermons were developmental in nature, and he attracted both black and white people. I became his avid supporter and would spend at least 3 to 4 days a week with him. He helped me understand even further the dynamics of Christianity. He held key positions in the Assemblies of God and was a sought-after speaker from universities to communities. He was an excellent communicator. I decided to settle with him in his own church in the dusty streets of Kwatema and Katlehong and was inspired by his Bible studies and the various messages he taught. I figured with his messages we had the opportunity to help reshape the mind of the African. I was taking my speaking and consulting business very seriously and perfecting my art. Pastor Nick was my sounding board on everything, and I decided as a way of giving back, I was going to be his agent for free to help streamline his work and ministry. One Friday night, before I left for an assignment in Cape Town the next day, I called Pastor Nick about going over my notes. We agreed to speak at 9 that evening, and when I landed at 8 in Cape Town, I decided to go straight to my room and be there to be in time to call him to go over my presentation. I called him exactly at 9 p.m. and he didn't answer his phone. I tried repeatedly until I fell asleep at around midnight. I left a message telling him how displeased I was that he hadn't taken my call. When I opened my eyes in the morning, I called him and his phone went to voicemail and I decided to let it go. Later that morning, I got an urgent call from Ntabiseng. I thought maybe my dad had passed away, only to discover my mentor had been in an accident the night before. While I was calling him frantically, he was busy dying. I was devastated, to say the least, and decided it was time for me to go back. I took the next flight out to Johannesburg. It was the longest 2 hours I had in a long time. I got to his home, and he had left a message with his wife that should something happen to him, I must be given the responsibility of organizing his funeral. It was like he had a premonition, and I was left alone and very directionless. My speaking career had blossomed, and Empower Consulting was making serious inroads in the world of consulting. Money was flowing, and I was starting to enjoy the limelight. But there were difficulties, and I decided to go into the fashion industry. I wanted to visit all the fashion stores in the U.S. and bring clothes and ideas back into a retail space in South Africa. I bought my very first new car, a 325 BMW. I modified the engine and put in hot pistons and double exhaust and lowered the suspension. I just loved it, and this was my first visible achievement since coming to South Africa. I was on the path of making a success of myself. I was inspired and motivated and dared to dream the impossible. I also bought my first piece of property in Fourways, a prime spot for a steal. I found a white woman who thought that South Africa was going to implode. She had a beautiful stand of 4 acres, which I bought to build my own home from scratch. When I moved in, I lived there for 2 weeks without carpets or furniture. It was my home and I was happy. My first ever property. After my marriage to Ntabiseng, I brought her home, gave her the keys, and we started a family. I continued with my endeavors and traveled all the time. I was organizing American tours to the motherland, traveling overseas. I had a transport business with AXA and was speaking professionally. Everything seemed to be going correctly. I was also helping in local community churches with so many projects. I became a public success. I was celebrated by many as a wonderful, successful person who was destined for greatness and better things. I was moving in important cycles. I'd even conceptualized and sold 2 shows to SABC for 3 million rand and was the executive producer. I didn't say no to any opportunity that came, but sooner or later something had to give, and I found myself wanting in my responsibility as a husband and father. I was still going to church every Sunday, but I'm still not sure if church was ever in me. I hated sometimes the fact that I had a conscience. I wished I didn't care for anyone and didn't have feelings for anyone. The conscience, or that stale small voice, was telling me deep down in my heart of hearts that I was wrong and that I was making it hard for myself. You see, I was becoming a bit cocky and arrogant and wayward in my ways. My family structure was barely holding together, and the desire for more success was driving me. This was my time, and I was going to make the best of it. Funny, when I was poor and had nothing, I was completely spiritual, and I would pray for my life to be better and trusted God to come through for me. Now that I had few cents in my bank account and opportunities were everywhere, I was in demand. God didn't matter anymore. In fact, I would argue that God only helps those who help themselves. Little did I realize that it was taking a toll on me and my family. I was too far gone and too arrogant to listen to any advice, let alone my wife's. Cracks started showing in my marriage. I started coming home late at night and organizing trips that didn't exist just so I could be left alone to continue in my madness of the pseudo-success. My wife in her spiritual journey had found God and was pursuing Him relentlessly. She would spend hours praying and saying nothing to me. She would confront me now and then when my stories did not add up and I was caught out. I was a master in configuring stories to get out of a jam. My schedule for Sundays at least was church, and there were 2 services. I was serving in leadership and was respected by my leaders and members alike. They didn't know about the behavioral changes that were going on in my mind and the battles I was fighting. The last place to share anything personal is church, particularly the charismatic church I was in. It was full of gossipers who celebrate people's downfall and are quick to judge and condemn without knowing the full story. I kept everything to myself and never allowed myself to be vulnerable to anyone, let alone church members. I had a position and I needed to protect it to the best of my ability. I was not going to share anything with anyone. I'd seen so many times how people would tear into other people's reputations. Sometimes it would all just be a lie, and I vowed never to share my dirty linen in public. This was problematic and meant that if you were in leadership, you had to learn to be secretive, not only with your own flaws, but also the flaws of other people. So I kept to myself. I projected a successful image with a marriage that was working.
That was another episode of The Door, an Addict's Journey, written by Abner Mariri. The book is available on www.abner.africa. It is broadcast on SAFM at 11:45 Monday to Thursday on The Talking Point. It is produced for the station by Vovi Patala, read by Samson Kumalo, technical production by Nanda Koza.
Well, it's just after 12 o'clock on Tuesday, the 18th of June, 2024. A very warm welcome to Updated Noon here on SAFM. Leading the conversation, I'm Sakina Kamwendo. Coming up in the next hour,
the inauguration will bring together South Africans from all backgrounds, all walks of life and political orientation, united in our diversity.
South Africa to witness another inauguration at the Union Buildings tomorrow.
Look, we want this to be resolved either diplomatically or militarily. The current state of affairs is not a sustainable reality.
And the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to hold consultations about the ongoing war in Gaza. Coming up in sport,
the Super 8 groups are decided. The Proteas come up against the West Indies, the United States and England. Mbappe won't need surgery after breaking his nose at Euros 2024. And Dricus du Plessis could be fighting on the same day as the Springboks play Australia.
And John Chirika with more of those details later in the show. We always want to hear from you. Please get in touch. Share your views with us on 41391. That's our SMS line number, charged at R1.50 per SMS. You can also write to us via X or Facebook, our handle at SABC News_radio, or using the hashtag Updated Noon. Alternatively, there's always the channel for WhatsApp. So your WhatsApp voice notes can be sent to 082-692-3909. Well, these and more stories coming up on this Tuesday edition of Updated Noon. First, though, here's the latest news with Modupi Mohlahlana.
you very much, Sister Sakina. The top story is Sawa, a dozen Home Affairs officials dismissed for corruption, and Putin to visit North Korea. Very good afternoon. Home Affairs says its 12 officials that were found guilty of working with a Pakistani national to forge South African passports have already been dismissed. Minister Arun Motsoaledi has welcomed the conviction and sentencing of the Pakistani national Arfan Ahmed. He had been arrested in a sting operation at the Home Affairs office in Krugersdorp on the west of Joburg in March 2022. Ahmed was working with officials from Gauteng, Limpopo, KZN, the Eastern Cape, Western Cape, and Mpumalanga. Home Affairs spokesperson Cathy Mohlahlana.
In the aftermath of his arrest, his home was searched where multiple passports which were not supposed to be there were found. For this offense, he's serving 8 years. As the kingpin of the passport photo swap, he was recently sentenced to another 10 years imprisonment by the Krugersdorp Regional Court, and he's therefore serving a total of 18 years for his involvement in the overall passport syndicate activities.
A teenager has been gunned down in Philippi on the Cape Flats. Police spokesperson Wesley Twigg says the 19-year-old learner was found with a gunshot wound to the head.
The victim was declared deceased on the scene by medical personnel. The suspect fled the scene and are yet to be arrested. The motive for the attack forms part of the police investigation.
Analysts have sought to explain why investors have welcomed the formation of a government of national unity. They say they are convinced that it provides a framework for expedited infrastructure and other changes aimed at reviving the economy following years of weak growth and high unemployment. The rand was marginally firmer against the dollar in early trade following the confirmation of members of the unity last week. It is currently trading at 18.18 to the dollar. The ANC says it is committed to a smooth transition to the newly formed government of national unity to honor the aspirations of South Africans. The party has extended an olive branch to opposition parties, urging them to join the union. The development comes as 5 parties, including the ANC, DA, IFP, PA, and the Good Party, enter into an agreement on governing the country ahead of the inauguration of the president-elect tomorrow. ANC spokesperson Mahlengi Bengumudziri.
All parties have been approached by the ANC to come to the table. 5 parties have signed. It cannot be a grand coalition unless we think that the vote share of other parties is insignificant. The IFP and all the other parties that have signed. And the characterization that this is an ANC-DA arrangement is really devoid of facts.
A reminder that the inauguration of the President-elect Cyril Ramaphosa will be broadcast on SABC News Live on SABC Plus tomorrow. The proceedings will also be streamed live on the SABC News YouTube channel and on SABC Radio. And on the international front, Russian President Vladimir Putin has praised North Korea for firmly supporting his country's war against Ukraine. Putin is preparing to visit Pyongyang for the first time in more than 2 decades. He made the remarks in a letter that the North Korean state media has published ahead of Putin's arrival later today. More from the BBC's Shaima Khalil.
This visit has been described by Ukraine as the world's loneliest bromance, and it really encapsulated that relationship. Each knows that the other has something that they want. Russia wants that desperately needed munition and continued weaponry, even though that both Moscow and Pyongyang have continued to deny that North Korea is providing weapons. North Korea is in desperate need of everything from food, fuel, foreign currency, and of course satellite technology after it failed to launch its spy satellite into orbit last month.
The top story at midday, Home Affairs says its 12 officials that were found guilty of working with a Pakistani national to forge South African passports have already been dismissed. For SAFM News, Kimudupi Makhalemele.
Update at noon with Sakina Kamwendo, midday to 1 p.m. Update at noon with Sakina Kamwendo.
Thanks, Mudupi. Mudupi will be back with your headlines at 12:30. But it is right now 8 minutes after 12. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in to Update at Noon. And of course, looking to take forward some of the stories that you've heard there in the news and update you on as many of them as we can. And speaking of tomorrow's inauguration of President-elect Cyril Ramaphosa for a second term, we are currently witnessing the arrival of many heads of state, those who have confirmed that they will be attending tomorrow's inauguration, expecting heads of state and other high-ranking officials from countries like the Kingdom of Eswatini, Lesotho, Republic of Congo, from the Republic of South Sudan, Republic of Mozambique, Angola, Zimbabwe, and also the Democratic Republic of Congo, Mauritius, Nigeria, Tanzania, Namibia, Cuba, Seychelles, Cote d'Ivoire, Uganda, Burundi. Those are all countries, Brazil as well, Malawi, Zambia, and China. As well as Palestine. We're expecting delegations and heads of state from all of those countries. So this is what we are also monitoring at the moment, just to see who has arrived. As far as I know, this is a list of those heads of state and other delegated government officials who have RSVP'd for tomorrow's presidential election, inauguration rather, I should say. And we are monitoring their arrival both at O.R. Tambo International Airport and at the Waterkloof Air Force Base. So that is one of the stories that we'll bring you an update on in a short while. Some of the other stories that we are watching, the ANC Youth League, they're looking to react to the governing party's decision to form this government of national unity that comprises, among others, the DA, the IFP, the PA, and Good Party. So we'll bring you up to speed with what they have to say. Also, of course, we're watching what's happening in the various provincial legislatures with the inaugurations taking place there. And among them, the newly elected Premier of Limpopo, Poppy Ramathuba, is expected to announce new members of the Executive Committee on Tuesday, along with others. As I say, we are monitoring all of these provincial legislatures as well. And also some court stories. The Senzo Mayiwa trial continues. Also looking at what's happening in the provinces. The Julius Malema and co-accused bodyguard Adrian Snyman, they back in the East London Magistrates Court today. So all of those stories we are watching, and of course we'll bring you an update on. But let us know what your thoughts are on the latest developments.
Sakina Kamwendo on SAFM.
10 minutes after 12. Now, government says it is finalizing its preparations for the inauguration of President-elect Cyril Ramaphosa at the Union Buildings in Pretoria tomorrow. Ramaphosa was re-elected as the president of the country at the first sitting of the National Assembly of the 7th Democratic Administration at the Cape Town International Convention Centre on Friday. Now, the authorities have advised residents to use alternative routes as numerous streets around the Union Buildings around Hatfield and Sunnyside will be closed from 3 a.m. tomorrow morning. Kailihle Kumalo has more on this.
The presidential inauguration is an important feature in a year in which South Africa is marking 30 years of freedom under the theme 30 years of democracy, partnership and growth, which is also the theme of the inauguration. The inauguration will bring together South Africans from all backgrounds, all walks of life and political orientation, united in our diversity.
That is all systems go for the presidential inauguration this coming week.
The South African National Defence Force will perform the ceremonial elements of the inauguration as they pledge their allegiance to both the Republic and the Commander-in-Chief. The ceremonial elements will include, amongst others, a 21-gun salute, a salute flight by the South African Air Force, the inspection of the South African National Defence Force battalions, a battalion march past, and a mast fly past, which will include the South African Airways. The newly sworn-in President of the Republic will deliver his inaugural address.
And agencies will also ensure that the ceremony proceeds without a glitch.
PS Ministers Cluster, supported by net joints, the law enforcement agencies are fully deployed to continue to ensure safety and security of all South Africans and our guests on the day and throughout the post-election phase of the country.
If you look at the history coming for the 19th, there were issues that many of South Africans thought things would not happen accordingly. There were some few threats of the elections not taking place. There were some few threats when the announcement would not be made. There were some few threats when the parliament would not sit. And all those things happened accordingly and planned. This one also will happen accordingly as planned.
National and foreign guests, including heads of states and government, are expected to attend.
Invitations have been sent out to a number of heads of state and leaders of government, and we've been receiving responses. Part of the challenge is that we indicated that we are inviting, it would be in a particular period. We now will convey the date as has been set out by Minister Nchabeni. A large number of the invitations have gone to heads of state of the SADC region, Central and East Africa, as well as all the chairpersons of the regional economic bodies, and of course the chairperson of the African Union Commission, the president of the Pan-African Parliament. So those would be the invited guests.
South Africa's key trading partners like the US, Russia, international organizations and the neighboring countries have sent messages of support as the country's president-elect Cyril Ramaphosa has been re-elected. Khailehle Khumalo, SABC News, Pretoria.
So for the latest on this story, we join on the line now by SABC International News Editor Sophie Mokwena. Sophie, good afternoon. So we know that some are expected later today, but who do we know for a fact has already arrived?
Thank you, Sakina. Yes, we know that the Vice President of Cuba has arrived. He's expected to visit Freedom Park this afternoon. Kaya Khumalo will be there, but also the Prime Minister of Burundi arrived earlier today at OR International Airport. We are now at Waterkloof, where we expect the arrival of the President of Namibia, the President of Zimbabwe, the President of Angola, and other dignitaries to land with different time allocation. The first one, we expect that the dignitary who will arrive will be around 13:30 today, but we are already here at Waterkloof, and I can see in the skies of Pretoria the rehearsal by the military, and because they are using even the Waterkloof military base for taking off. And also here at Waterkloof, tight security, and we see some diplomats who are already here, who are waiting to receive their principals or their heads of state and government.
And Sophie, of course, all about looking forward to tomorrow. But we are, of course, hearing quite a bit from people reacting to this government of national unity. On the international front, has there been much reaction formally to the formation of a government of national unity in South Africa?
We saw the Americans responding and the developed North. That would include your European Union congratulating the president-elect, and you can see the excitement from the developed North. We know, Sakina, it's no secret that the developed North wanted South Africa to tone down on certain issues at international level, particularly after that saga of Lady R, the military vessel from Russia. We know that the Americans were not happy. We know that some countries in the north were not happy. Now, the decision by South Africa to go to the International Court of Justice added to that. As you know, that many of these developed countries are supporting Israel, and many of them were not happy about South Africa's foreign policy. On the other hand, we had South Africa saying that this is, we are protecting our own independence as a state. And therefore, them seeing this coalition, many were really hoping for something like this, where you are able to reduce the African National Congress, particularly as the governing party, toning down some of the policies of the African National Congress. But when you look at the South will be worried because they don't know what's going to happen in relation to the role South Africa has played in strengthening the South-South. When you come to the continent, it gets even more hectic when you see people online and in different platforms talking about this, trying to unpack the academics on the continent. You can see that there are many questions, particularly in relation to the African National Congress as the oldest liberation organization on the continent that gave birth to many political parties on the continent that fought for the liberation and fighting the colonial past, and were able to get liberation before South, even though the ANC was the first organization to try and unite the Africans to fight colonialism. And therefore, there are questions. In the South, it gets even more tricky because you have liberation organizations who are watching the developments and are saying what's going to happen to our countries. When you look at a country like Mozambique, Namibia, Botswana, they will be going to elections. And those countries are led by former liberation organizations. And therefore, yes, the relationship will continue party to party and state to state. But what will that have, the influence or the impact thereof to such countries? Countries such as Zimbabwe are also watching. And when you look at what international analysts are saying, they are saying that they are hoping that these countries will not isolate South Africa, not totally, but begin to have some reservations, because now you have a different government in South Africa. It is not a full ANC-led government. It's now a government where you also have members of the opposition with different views in relation to foreign policy, including the economic policy.
Sophie Mokoena, thank you so much for that. SABC News' international editor, Sophie Mokoena, speaking to us there from the Waterkloof Air Force Base. And this is, of course, where a number of heads of state are expected to arrive throughout the day in preparation for tomorrow's inauguration of President-elect Cyril Ramaphosa. Well, for further analysis, we join on the line by the chair of the African Diplomacy and Foreign Policy at the University of Johannesburg, Chris Landsberg. Prof, good afternoon. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
So when we spoke the last time, it was all about the article that you and Ibrahim Fakir had penned about a government of national unity. And now we've moved on well beyond that. But of course, people are asking, is this in fact a government of national unity? The ANC-DA and the IFP with the PA and the Good Party? Or is this a grand coalition, or is this just a coalition of another sort? What is this exactly?
Thank you for having me, Sakina. Both Ibrahim and I came out subsequently and said, and as you said, lots of water have ran under many bridges since then. We made the case for a GNU a genuine GNU that will be all inclusive of as many players as possible across racial and cultural divides, for example, etc., etc. We are now beyond the point where we need to explain that there is indeed a crisis that is playing out in South Africa, and it's now up to this, listen carefully, Sakina, coalition. I'm not even sure if this is a grand coalition. In other words, a grand coalition would be one that includes most parties, but not everybody, right? A limited coalition would be what we had, and many people are not even aware of it, that Madame Patricia de Lille was part of the ANC government. I'm not even sure if 1994 was then a government of national unity, because only 3 parties joined it. So if people really want to quibble about sort of semantics, then we could even ask the question whether 1994 was a GNU, because it was made up of 3 parties, the ANC, the National Party, and the IFP. But to answer your question emphatically and in short, Sakina, no, it is not a government of national unity. There are too many parties with key interests and representing key constituencies in the country that are not there.
So as things stand right now, of course, as you say, this is a coalition, and we've obviously been hearing about agreements that have been struck and signed, and some of it, I suppose, will come out in dribs and drabs. But I think listening to Helen Ziller yesterday on another radio station doing an interview, it's already becoming clear that there have been some serious discussions on at least some of the policy positions that may become key. But I want to ask you a question that I asked of Rolf Meyer this morning as well, just to get your sense of it. In terms of the policy agenda, what should be uppermost in the minds of those who are part of the coalition?
Okay, so Sakina, there is a document that's doing the rounds, and I assume that it's a public document, the statement of intent document, this 9-page document. It started off very well on 2 aspects that is directly related to your question. It spells out very clearly the kind of values that this government should espouse and all should commit themselves to. It's almost taken verbatim from our constitution, right? And I think it, in broad strokes, it reminds me a lot of the values that the ANC used to espouse, but maybe in practice veered away from, or certainly found it difficult to implement. From non-racialism to redress, yes, the word redress is there. Commitment to constitutionalism. So those are very broad values. When it comes to the policy issues, Sakina, I don't think the document goes into detail, which therefore begs the question. When we say redress, will it be, let's say, affirmative action? I don't really want to go to the BEE debate. It's so contentious amongst these parties. But will it be, for example, still pro-affirmative action? Or to quote the DA's one, will it be an equal society approach, right? So it's almost going to be a colorblind approach. Let me take one on foreign policy that's very, very important. The ANC stands for a progressive internationalism. Progressivism, in other words, just solidarity to make sure that issues of poverty, inequality, and everything is addressed, and those are also in the values. Or will it be a liberal orientation like the DA that is pro human rights and so? And just to give you one example that's playing out in practice, the DA was very enthusiastic to make sure that if President Vladimir Putin sets foot on our shores, he would be arrested at Cape Town International. I just don't see the same kind of enthusiasm for for what's going on in Israel and attempted warrants of arrest against the leaders of that country. So, yeah, the policies, Sakina, that's people say the devil is in the detail. I actually think the angel is in the detail.
That's going to be interesting to see how all of that plays out, because if we look at again some of the more contentious issues, one of the interesting things that Helen Zille said yesterday in that interview that she did was, they are going to, on the Phala Phala matter, for example, wait until new evidence is presented. And I'm paraphrasing hopelessly. And then you're reminded, and I actually went back, you look at John Steenhuisen, late last year, November last year, and I'm going to quote what he says in this tweet, the X. He says, "The Phala Phala matter is far from over, and the DA will not rest until the truth is finally brought to light. We cannot allow another sitting ANC president to dodge accountability through subterfuge, abuse of the courts, and captured institutions. South Africa deserves the truth." Unquote.
Right.
So, what does it then mean if the same DA now that they are part of this coalition now suddenly takes on a different view on this matter? And are we likely to see more? Are we likely to see more of this sort of, I don't even know what to call it at this point. Is it flip-flopping, whatever
I like
it
your
is?
word subterfuge.
Yes.
I like your word subterfuge. Yeah.
So are we likely to see more of this? And if we are, do these parties owe it to South Africans in general to let us know exactly what the details of their agreement is?
And Sakina, we only have to wait for a month or so, right? Why do I say that? There's a very important event happening tomorrow, the inauguration. Then this president has to put together a cabinet, and the first order of business of that cabinet is to put a budget together along all these important portfolio areas. The redress. I mean, land is even there. So I tell you what is fascinating. There's a backlash in ANC quarters against President Ramaphosa, and the backlash basically, there are basically two camps, the way I follow it. There are those who say, let's make this thing work, let's give it a chance, and let's help to make it work, right? Then there are those who say it's a sellout. But let me tell you what's fascinating about you asking the question from a DA point of view. Not only was that quote of yours very apropos, it was spot on and poignant, an example. But the DA is the rule of law party, we are told. The DA is the party that used litigation as a tool of politics more than any party. I mean, our politics became a litigious politics, and the DA championed that. Now, I said we have to wait until the 18th of next month. First setting of Parliament, State of the Nation address, then Parliament's business begins. And the EFF and the quote-unquote progressive coalition already made clear, item number one from them, put Phala Phala back on the agenda. Question, how will the DA vote? And let me tell you why this is important, Sakina. The DA itself might believe that they have the ANC in a corner, but they themselves run the risk of losing faith and face amongst their voter population and their voter base for almost now, almost taking a step back and pulling back from important promises that they have made. And it's going to be interesting to see how this thing plays out. I expect there to be a huge debate about the deputy president. The DA was hell-bent that they do not want deputy president or former deputy president Paul Mashatile near. How are they going to navigate these things? They all sit with a dilemma, except, I suppose, for parties like the newcomers like Gaten McKenzie's, PA, Madam Patricia de Lille's, Good, and others. But the big ones have some explanation to do. There's one point I want to squeeze in, but only if we have time.
Well, I'll allow you to just squeeze it in. Mudupi will just grant us a minute or so before we go to headlines.
So I said to you there are two good aspects of the statement of intent. Let me tell you what's the most fascinating part. I implore you and others to read, and I know someone like yourself would have read it already. When it comes to the part on modalities and decision making, that's for me, that's interesting, the way it's crafted. It says sufficient consensus of a 60% threshold. But if you can't reach sufficient consensus, sufficient consensus will be the rule by which decisions are taken. But if you can't reach consensus, you go for sufficient consensus with a 60% threshold. Guess what, Sakina? There are more members of the former Moonlight Pact, what I call Moonlight 2.0, in the that have signed on to the GNU right now, as we have any other party, and I do expect others to come on board. That's, for me, the contentious issue, decision making, and the question is, did the ANC just bet itself into a corner there?
Well, Professor Chris Landsberg, always lovely chatting. Thanks so much for your time. Chair of the Africa Diplomacy and Foreign Policy at the University of Johannesburg, Professor Chris Landsberg. Mudupi Mohlahlana, thanks so much for your indulgence. What's in the headlines?
Thank you very much, Sakina. You're most welcome. In your headlines this hour, a cell phone expert says the cell phone number of one of the accused in the Senzo Meyiwa murder trial is registered under a different name. The Home Affairs Department says its 12 officials that were found guilty of working with a Pakistani national to forge South African passports have already been dismissed, and a teenager has been gunned down in Philippi on the Cape Flats. Details of these and other stories at 1.
Economic news on SAFM. Facts and figures you can count on.
The rand is trading at 18 rand 18 cents to the US dollar, 23 rand 3 cents to the pound sterling, and 19 rand 46 to the euro. The euro currently trading at $1.07 and the dollar's at 158 yen 14. In Brazil, 1 US dollar is trading at 5 real 42. In Russia, 87 rubles 40. India, 83 rupees 43. And in China, 1 US dollar will buy you 7 yuan 25. Markets in Asia were mainly higher at the close of trade today. Hong Kong's Hang Seng shed 0.1%. Mainland China's Shanghai Index firmed 0.5%. Japan's Nikkei gained 1%, while India's markets are slightly firmer at the close of trade. The JSE mainly higher at midday. The All-Share Index has gained 2.5% to 79,021. The Industrials 25 Index is 1.6% higher. Financials have surged by 6%. Top 10 Resources Index has fallen 0.2%, and the Precious Metals and Mining Index 0.8% to the good. On the capital market, the yield on the R186 government bond is at 8.81%, and the yield on the R2030 9.98%. European markets green across the board. Britain's FTSE 100 has added 0.4%. The CAC 40 in France up 0.2%, and Germany's DAX has strengthened by 0.2% as well. Looking at commodities, gold trading at $2,312 per fine ounce. Platinum's at $970 per ounce, while the price of Brent crude oil is at $83.98 a barrel.
SAFM Sport with John Gericka.
Good afternoon. Let's start with the cricket. The West Indies beat Afghanistan by 104 runs in the meaningless last pool match of the T20 World Cup in the West Indies and the USA. So, next stage is the Super 8s, 4 teams in each group. Each team will play the others in the group as a round robin. The top 2 teams advance to the semi-finals. South Africa are in Group 2 with the hosts, the West Indies and the United States, also England. Group 1 is India, Australia, Afghanistan and Bangladesh. In the football, Group F finishes its first round today. Turkey against Georgia at 6. Portugal against the Czech Republic at 9. Portugal defender Ruben Diaz, speaking through an interpreter, had this to say when asked if his sides are the favourites.
We know about the context, so not everything is new. But, like I said, we need to come together again. This is very important, very relevant. We need, after each time we're together, we need to come together. And so after a very busy season, our minds have to be crisp and fresh.
Meanwhile, Kylian Mbappe will not need surgery but will wear a mask when he returns to action after the France captain suffered a broken nose in the 1-0 win over Austria last night. Mbappe collided with Austrian defender Kevin Danzo as they competed for the ball in the air late in the Group D encounter in Düsseldorf. In rugby news, Racing 92 owner Jack Lorenzetti says that former Springbok captain Siya Kolisi was invisible in the weekend's French top 14 playoff defeat to Bordeaux Bagels. The Parisians lost 31-17 on Sunday, condemning back row Kolisi to a trophyless season in his first campaign with the club after April's Champions Cup last 16 loss to eventual winners Toulouse. Says Lorenzetti, he says he put on a few kilos, lost his form, and yesterday he was invisible. We missed him, said the 76-year-old. Meanwhile, the Springboks are gathered ahead of their one-off test against Wales in London on Saturday. Coach Rassie Erasmus is balancing injury issues, spoke about who will captain the side on Saturday and in future matches.
And without seeing if Siya comes without an injury back to South Africa, and we can assess him and see how he slots in and those kind of things. We have 2 weeks after the Wales Test match, but yeah, it will probably be Peter Steph Tutoy or Eben. It can be Bongi, but then we'll make that call on Sunday night after the Bulls game internally, and we'll announce a captain for Wales. But then when we announce the Irish squad after that, obviously we'll announce, and obviously a guy like Siya will be in the running.
And UFC champion Dricus du Plessis reportedly set to defend his middleweight title on the same day as the world champion Springboks face the Wallabies in Perth. The Boks play their second rugby championship match against Australia on the 17th of August, and in a social media post, former UFC title holder Israel Adesanya announced that he will fight du Plessis at UFC 305 at the RAC Arena in Perth on the same day. It would be Adesanya's first fight since dropping the belt to the USA Sean Strickland at UFC 293 in September of 2023. There's netball coming up today. Premier League action, the third and fourth place playoff between the Southern Stings and the Gauteng Golden Fireballs. They start at 4 o'clock today. And Jaylen Brown was named NBA Finals Most Valuable Player as his Boston Celtics polished off the Dallas Mavericks 4-1 to earn a record 18th championship. 27-year-old averaged 20.8 points, 5.4 rebounds, and 5 assists in 5 final games. Delivered a strong defensive effort as well during the regular season. Let's hear more from Brown.
It's an unreal feeling. To be honest, it don't even feel real right now, but it's a great feeling, man. And to go through the whole journey is what makes it great right now.
And that's a look at your sport. There's plenty more through the afternoon.
Are you ready to empower yourself with an accredited tertiary qualification? Stadio Higher Education's distance learning programs will set you up for success. Whether you're balancing work and family or you're a school leaver who must work to support yourself and your studies, Stadio offers access to high-quality, affordable qualifications in law, teacher education, commerce, admin and management, policing, and more. Mid-year applications are now open. Visit stadio.ac.za and register today. Stadio, a new vision in higher education.
Now you can get private banking levels of service from Auto & General. They've just launched their private advisory service, and if you have more than a car to insure and your combined cover is valued at more than 1 million rand, you qualify. To celebrate, they're giving you the chance to win in the Auto & General Combine and Qualify competition. Visit safm.co.za, complete the entry form, and we could be calling you live on air. You'll be presented with various scenarios of insurable items. If you combine the correct two that meet the qualifying criteria for a private advisor, you'll win 5,000 Rand. Plus, if you get an obligation-free insurance quote from Auto & General, you'll get an extra 1,000 Rand. Visit safm.co.za and enter now. Auto & General is a licensed non-life insurer and FSP. T's and C's online.
Hey there! Need to know your TV license balance but don't want to wait? No sweat!
Just send a quick SMS with your ID or TV license number to 44210. Remember, standard SMS rates apply. And presto, your balance pops right up anytime, anywhere. It's as easy as pie. So why procrastinate? Give it a try and get your info in a flash. T's and C's apply.
Update at noon with Sakina Kamwendo, midday to 1 p.m.
And it's time now to listen to some of your views. Let's start with some of the messages. Let me read one or two and then listen to voice notes. Vugani Ngobo says, Sakina, I'm very worried about this government of national unity. I hear some analysts saying it will stabilize the country. For me, it will be chaotic more than ever when the laws and policies have to be made. Because DAs and ANC are far apart with the EFF and MK lurking. It's going to be very interesting. Zaki Matebula says, well, tomorrow we will witness the history of the government of national unity starting to work. ANC didn't win a majority to rule the country alone. It makes me happy that in service delivery, no blame games anymore. We need service delivery from everyone in the government of national unity. So those are some of the messages coming through via X. Let's listen to some of your voice notes.
Good day, Sakina and the SFM listeners. It's painful, Sakina, to hear that some of the presidents in contestation for abusing power in their countries, they've got the guts to attain the democratic principles that are being done in South Africa. And after ignoring the recommendations of the SADC. Now, this head of states, they are invited to inaugurations in South Africa, yet there are leaders who are sitting in contestations. It's very painful, Sakina. Thanks. This is James in Johannesburg.
Good afternoon, Mam Sakina. Good afternoon to the listeners of SAFM. Mam Sakina, I don't understand one thing here. When Zuma was formed, MK Party was campaigning about Ramaphosa and the ANC. Now the people they voted Zuma. Even today, he's still talking about the ANC and Ramaphosa. What is the objective of the MK Party, especially to the Zulu people? What is the objective? Because the people, they voted for him. He must deliver to the people. He must stop to talk about ANC and Ramaphosa. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Sakina. This is Zanile in Durban. After all is said and done, but let me congratulate Utaminduli for his new position as a Premier of KZN. I really wish they can put their differences aside and work for people. These people who are voters, no matter which party they voted for, their vote was crying for help. These are the people who are being killed by the water if they are crossing river because there is no bridge. These are the people who are being killed by the hunger, who are unemployed. I wish their cry will be heard now. Thank you.
Good day, Sakin. I'm just curious. I just heard a snippet of the ANC spokesperson talking about the inauguration. Shouldn't that announcement or pronouncement be made by government? In this case, it would be the GCIS telling us, or maybe the Department of International Relations. How is the ANC pronouncing on the inauguration of the president of the country? I don't understand. Can you please enlighten me, Sakina? Debu here. Thanks.
Well, thanks so much for those messages. When you say ANC, I thought it was Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, who is, of course, minister in the presidency. So that would be from a government perspective that the announcement was made. So I'm just not too sure. Unless you're speaking of something else that I may have missed. But I thought that was the minister in the presidency making that announcement from a government office. But yeah, those are some of the messages. If we have more time, we'll squeeze in a few more.
Update at noon, midday to 1 p.m.
Now, as South Africa marks 30 years of democracy, SABC News has launched Democracy 30, which is a program dedicated to marking this historic milestone. And this week, the team zooms into the current generation of young leaders in the country's political arena and their sentiments on the fight for economic emancipation. Unemployment has been at the center of discussions and debates of pertinent issues that affect the country's economic growth and its development. And young people say that the challenges are ongoing, but there is, however, visible changes that have been made in people's lives. This report by Ishmael Mudiba.
Empowering young people and building inclusive economy are some of the issues that speak to youth unemployment. And the reality is that unemployment negatively impacts on everyone. One of the youngest political leaders in the Free State provincial government, MEC for Public Works, Dibulelo Manje, says they support what they call inclusive economy.
The greatest enemy for our seventh administration is empowering young people. Unemployment in the country has become yet another disaster looming. So as we navigate towards the seventh administration, we're saying, yes, of course, you have built houses for our people. We have given them roads, we have given them water, we have given them electricity. But unfortunately, at this point in time, they're saying, yes, we are grateful to our democracy for everything that you have done for us. But in Ngoku, we want to stand on our own 2 feet. We want jobs. That's why the ANC says its second priority, it speaks about inclusive economy. We're saying we need to build industries to ensure that we've got new industries that are going to deal with issues of unemployment in the province.
Residents and young people have expressed different thoughts as they caution about the checks and balances. Their main concern is the issue of unemployment. Some of them had this to say.
For now, democracy meant nothing to me because I can't put food on the table for my family. Whereas Bona up there, they can do whatever they want. They can get their tenders, they can get their jobs through. So what is democracy without land? What is democracy without job? What is democracy without employment? So that's why some say that democracy meant nothing. When our fathers were fighting the hope that at least Abano Nababo will have a better future. And Sitabano Nababo, we are not having a better future. What does democracy mean? It means nothing. Because I've got no future, I've got no job, I've got nothing on my side.
I'll say yes, because I'm one of the students who achieved a bursary. I got an opportunity to go to school with a bursary. So previously during apartheid, the children weren't given the bursaries. So I feel very proud that democracy, at least not all of us, but some of us, we did achieve something from it.
But now the problem is unemployment. I'm a qualified civil engineer with qualification. I've been looking for a job for a period of 7 years. Didn't get a job. I'm working at a restaurant as I speak. Even though I'm a manager there as a supervisor, you see, only the whites were allowed to manage the black people. So it worked to some extent to the selected few. So I think now the party that is ruling us need to step down because they did what they could do. They need to give the chance for another party and see how far they can go.
When apartheid has been seen as the enemy of the past, now unemployment and youth empowerment have been identified as new sophisticated challenges. I'm Ishmael Mudiba in Bloemfontein.
And don't forget, you can catch Democracy 30 on SABC News channel on DSTV and on SABC Plus app. And that's, of course, our edition for this week.
Sakina Kamwendo on SAFM.
Now, the IFP's Thami Ntuli has been sworn in KwaZulu-Natal as Premier. The government of provincial unity has elected Ntuli to lead the province. In the May 29 poll, the Umkhonto weSizwe party won in KwaZulu-Natal, but without an outright majority. Our reporter Fanele Mhlongo is covering the event and joins us on the line now. Fanele, good afternoon. So talk to us about the mood and, of course, how many delegates are actually witnessing Ntuli's inauguration. He's taking his oath of office today, but is everybody who's supposed to be there in attendance?
Yes, I would confirm that almost all the people who were expected to attend here have indeed attended, including the members of the MK party. That there were some who were suggesting that they might not attend this event today. Of course, they are here, as well as the members of the EFF who are sitting on the opposition benches. So together with the MK. Therefore, the members of now the MECs for the province of KwaZulu-Natal have just been sworn in now, and according to the Premier Tamintuli, they are all expected to hit the ground running from today.
So, has Mr. Ntuli outlined his vision for the province as he spoke today, Fanele?
Tamintuli, when he was speaking today, he said their main priority is to ensure that all members of the executive put aside their political differences and put people of KZN first. And he emphasized that they are all expected to serve the people with dignity and loyalty. He was emphasizing that they have to put aside their political differences, because we understand that the MECs that have been sworn in, they come from 4 different political provinces in KwaZulu-Natal who have come together from a government of provincial unity. Those political parties are ANC, IFP, DA, as well as the NFP, and also the MECs that have just been sworn in. They come from all these political parties.
Fanele, if you can just quickly give us a breakdown of who the MECs are.
Most of the faces that are the new MECs, they have not been MECs in the past term. The only MECs that are returning Ms. Namakukusi Milane, who is returning to her position as the MEC for Health, and then Sipho Hlomuga from the ANC is taking the Department of Education, and Tumuse Kawula of the IFP is taking the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. Economic Development Department will now be led by Reverend Musa Zondi of the IFP. Kokta is going to Reverend Tulasizo Butselezi again of the IFP. The Department of Agriculture, Rural Development is going to be led by Tsembeni Madlopa of the IFP. Department of Finance will be led by Francois Rogers of the DA. Public Works and Infrastructure is going to Martin Mayer of the DA. The Department of Social Development will now be led by Mbali Shinga from the NFP. So those are the MECs of the KwaZulu-Natal cabinet.
Very, very interesting. Thanks so much, Fanele Mhlongo, for bringing us up to speed, covering the swearing in of the IFP's Tami Ntuli as KZN Premier in Pietermaritzburg. Now let's move to Mpumalanga, where the new Premier Mandla Ndlovu is expected to announce his cabinet as well after he was elected Premier last week. Our reporter Mutibi Wamnareng joins us on the line for the latest there. Mutibi, good afternoon. So has the new Premier been sworn in, rather inaugurated, and also has he announced his cabinet as yet?
Indeed, Sakina, I can confirm that the Premier Mandla Ndlovu has been sworn in as the Mpumalanga Premier officially today by the Judge President Mphahlele. But I can also mention that as well, that he has already appointed his executive council, which comprises of 10 women and 10 men and women, 5 of which is women and 5 of them it's males. I can also confirm again to you that the MEC for Health, Sasekan Manzini, has retained her position as the MEC for Health in the province, and the MEC for Education, Bonagele Majuba, has now moved from the Education Department, is now heading the Finance Department. Then you have Speedy Mashilo, who was the MEC for Human Settlement. He has now given new role as the MEC for Kokta, and Human Settlement is now a new department. These 2 departments have merged together. This is what has happened today. And then we also have new faces of MECs that came in as the people that are going to work with the Premier of Mpumalanga. I can also mention that safety and security, you would know that it was held by Vusi Shongwe, who is no longer in the cabinet. We now have J.K. Masia as the new MEC for community safety and security in the province.
Well, Mutibi, thank you so much. But just a quick one. What did the new Premier have to say in terms of his vision for the province?
He said that he is coming from a rural village of Islington in the rural village of Bushbuck Ridge. He knows what it means when people are saying that they do not have water, they do not have proper roads. So he has put it clearly to his cabinet to say they should at least hit the ground running. They must make sure that they are going to meet those demands which the communities across the province of Mpumalanga are going to need. You'd know that Mpumalanga is a rural province. Many people will often go to the street protesting for water and roads. So he says that they must make sure that they are going to meet those demands which will be coming from these communities across the province.
Mutibi Munareng, thanks so much speaking to us there from Mpumalanga, where the new Premier Mandla Ndlovu has announced his cabinet. And of course, the former Premier Refilwe Mtsweni Tsipane, she was also elected as the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces on Saturday.
Sakina Kamwendo on SAFM.
Well, we have about a minute and a half. Let's listen to a few more of your voice notes.
Hello, Sakina. This is not the gangsters of national unity, as I call them. I don't call them the government of national unity, but they're just the gangsters who are going to perpetuate white supremacy, racism, economic injustices of black people in South Africa and people of color in South Africa. So they know why they are collaborating in this 5-year project, because they know the benefits. They know that some of them are also implicated in corruption cases, but because they have agreed to this gangsterism, they won't be charged. This is Sepiso.
Sakina, hi. This is JCK Kaunda from Sina. Sakina, I don't see any value for inauguration of the president. They must just do those things of taking oaths or swearing, because we have huge backlog of service delivery, especially in Eastern Cape, where there's no bridges. People have to negotiate rivers, no clinics, no schools. How many millions are spent on that inauguration? Money is only for booze and eating, while millions of South Africans are going to bed hungry with empty stomach. Government should review inauguration. Let me rest my case for now. JCK Kaunda from Sina.
And of course, a few quick ones on X to end off with. Petro Koza says, Sakina, our markets should just tell us who must lead us. Our vote is a waste to them. The markets disregard our choices. If only it was possible, Naledi would retain foreign ministry. And then this one is from Mponisi, the catalyst, who says, at long last, the MK is heading to Pali. About the guy who asked about the objectives, maybe ANC of Ramaphosa, that is the objective, as they keep saying this as is their objective. So those are some of your messages. And Etselimachu, final word. On a provincial level, can't we have appointments based on qualifications and expertise as opposed to being deployed? But I tell you what, it's already shaping up to be very, very interesting. But that's where we have to leave it. Tomorrow, it's the presidential inauguration. Right now, Mudupi Makhalimele standing by with your latest news at 1.
Thank you very much, SK. The top stories this hour: a dozen Home Affairs officials dismissed for corruption and a teenager gunned down in Cape Town. A very good afternoon. Home Affairs says its 12 officials that were found guilty of working with a Pakistani national to forge South African passports has already been dismissed. Minister Arun Motsoaledi has welcomed the conviction and sentencing of the Pakistani national Arfan Ahmed. He had been arrested in a sting operation at the Home Affairs office in Krugersdorp, west of Joburg,